April 16th, 2095. Perhaps one of the single most important days in human history. It was the day SpaceX successfully tested humanity's first FTL drive. This changed everything. Seeing the enormous opportunity, every major world government and major multinational corporation bought the underlying tech, making the entire SpaceX board the world's first trillionaires. But more importantly, it ignited a new space race. It was so important that many nations elected to adopt a new calendar, placing 2095 as year one. Space mining, colonization outside Earth, space-based research, things that would normally take the better part of a decade to even begin to set up, could be set up and started within a few years at a much cheaper cost. Within 2 decades, the Moon and Mars had colonies and military bases. Europa had a small colony of scientists. Corporations set up mining operations within the asteroid belt. Governments built vast space fleets, competing with each other for better weapons and defenses. Within 2 more decades, FTL drives were advanced even more, and Alpha Centauri was colonized. An unprecedented peace befell humanity. Sure, there was some small, unimportant rogue states and extremist groups, but for the most part, nations did everything in their power to avoid war. After all, any resources spent on war were not put towards space research. Because of this, we felt ready for first contact. Many waited until the day intelligent alien life would be discovered. The new science and tech and ideas and culture we would be introduced to, titled The Imagination. We thought we were ready. Good morning, humanity. It's 0800 System Standard Time, and today marks the 42nd anniversary since SpaceX developed the FTL drive. Happy Elon Day. Next up is Road to Progress by Jenna Freeman. This is KZIZ Radio. James hummed along to the song as he monitored system traffic. The American, Russian, and Chinese fleets were in Alpha Centauri for war games. The 3 biggest fleets being out of system meant it had been a very slow day so far, and he was only getting started. He yawned before taking a sip of coffee. Still hot, he'd have to let it cool down a bit longer. He looked at the picture on his desk, his wife and 3 kids. He smiled. Only 1 more week before his leave began, and he'd see them again. It sucked only being able to see them every few months, but that's the price he paid for military service. Do you recognize the configuration? Negative. Honestly, sir, these vessels don't look human. Some of them are massive, way bigger than anything we've ever made. There was silence before he continued. If I didn't know any better, I'd say we may be dealing with extraterrestrials. The captain never thought he'd actually ever say those words. I recommend we go to alert status until we figure out who they are and why they're here. We already are, Captain. The Admiral paused for a moment before continuing. Proceed with hailing them. Let's see what our visitors want. The tactical station beeped. Sir, I'm reading a large buildup of energy. It could be a weapon, the tactical officer shouted. Shit! Polarize the hull plat. A massive beam of energy shot out of the lead vessel, splitting the Victory in half. Victory, do you read me? The Admiral shouted over the comm. Victory, please respond. Nothing but silence filled the comm. Fuck, go to high alert. Several alarms started going off as the room slightly darkened, and lights flashed red. Fleets 1 and 2. Converge on the unknown fleet. Prepare to engage. Several dozen vessels converged on the massive fleet, which was speeding towards Earth. Sir, they're broadcasting a message system-wide. Put it on screen. An image of a gray figure with 2 large black eyes and an oval-shaped head appeared on the monitor. Attention, people of Earth, the figure began to talk, broadcasting in every major human language. This system and all of its contents are now property of the Frontarian Empire. All you have and are belong to us. Submit or die. The transmission cut out. The Admiral's face went white. So much for peaceful first contact. All units open fire. Their shields are fluctuating. Keep firing on that ship, the captain of the vessel ordered. Suddenly the whole ship rocked. Direct hit to our second engine. The whole ship lurched backwards, rocking the crew with it as it took another hit. Sir, we can't take much more of this. Come on, the captain of the ship said hopefully. waiting as the railguns pounded the alien deflector shields, until finally the alien ship's hull burst inward, cracking the vessel in half. "Emergency bulkheads," he shouted. "Evasive maneuvers and return fire." The helmsman and tactical officer frantically typed on their consoles, "Com, send a general hail to the fleet." The comm officer typed a few buttons before the captain spoke up again. "This is Captain O'Malley to the fleet. Their deflector shields can be broken. Continuous concentrated bombardment is the key." Boom! The ship suddenly jerked, almost knocking the captain off his feet again. "Sir, our hull plating is almost gone," shouted the tactical officer. "Come about and concentrate fire on that ship." The captain noticed a few alien ships being destroyed on his monitor before he heard the sound of his ship's railguns firing. "Sir, several alien vessels have been destroyed, but over half of our fleet is gone." O'Malley knew they couldn't hold out much longer. He only hoped they could last long enough for the reinforcements from Alpha Centauri to arrive. "Sir, 3 massive alien vessels have converged on Earth. They're accompanied by dozens of support ships." O'Malley looked at the monitor as the alien vessel they had been firing on split open and promptly exploded. "You heard the man. Set a course for Earth. Maximum speed." "Sir, I'm reading a massive buildup of energy from all 3 large alien vessels," the tactical officer shouted. What the hell were they doing? "Oh my God." O'Malley stared at the monitor in disbelief. All 3 behemoth alien vessels began firing massive beams of energy towards the Earth, the ground instantly liquefying the moment the beams made contact. Buildings, trees, cars, people, all vaporized as the molten ground expanded outward several hundred kilometers per hour. "Oh yeah," Admiral Turner proclaimed. America had lost the last 2 war games, but this one was going well. Looked like it would be a decisive victory for her fleet. Her, the Russian, and Chinese Grand Admirals sat in the observation deck of the orbital station above Alpha Centauri watching the war games unfold. "Don't get too excited, Turner," said Admiral Drankov. "You've lost the last 2 and haven't won this one yet." He shot a look at the monitor just in time to see the American fleet encircling the Russian forces. "Oh, for the love of priority?" He stopped to catch his breath. "Spit it out, Commander, I don't have all day," Shu said, narrowing his eyes. This got the 3 admirals' undivided attention, all staring at the Chinese commander. "What? Let me see that!" He held out his arm as the commander gave him the data pad, Zhu holding it out so that the other 2 could read it. "Dear God," all 3 mouthed in their native languages, before opening an emergency channel to their respective fleets. "This is Admiral Turner to the fleet. War games are canceled. Earth is under attack. You are hereby ordered to prepare for FTL jump, standard attack formation." After they finished relaying their messages, each left in a hurry to board their command ships. "Disregard the enemy ships. All units focus fire on the behemoths," the Admiral ordered, his voice almost in a state of panic. Jesus Christ, were they really glassing Earth? O'Malley thought to himself. "How long until we're in weapons range?" he shouted. O'Malley looked at the view screen with bated breath. Most of the fleet had already started firing upon the monstrosities. His ship being the furthest out would be the last to arrive. Whew. O'Malley sighed in relief. Just 2 more to go. But the Allied fleet was quickly diminishing. He worried they'd be completely gone before the job was finished. Boom! The ship suddenly rocked, knocking many bridge officers off their feet. "Frentarian vessel directly behind us," shouted the tactical officer. "Return fire, but maintain course and speed," O'Malley shouted back. Boom, the ship rocked again. "God damn it, take them out. You said they're behind us? Drop nuclear charges in their path," retorted O'Malley, visibly agitated. The tactical officer frantically typed on his console. The view screen showed the Frentarian vessel running directly into a charge, setting off a nuclear blast. It kept coming. "Keep dropping them until it's destroyed." The Frentarian vessel attempted to dodge the next one, but the charge went off anyway due to proximity. "Finish them!" O'Malley shouted before the sound of railgun fire echoed throughout the ship, followed by the Frontarian vessel blowing up spectacularly. The battle map showed another behemoth destroyed, but less than a dozen Allied ships to take on the last one, and still at least 100 Frontarian vessels raining hellfire on them. One more to go, thought O'Malley. Although he had his doubts, the last one would be finished off. How long until we're in weapons range? 30 seconds, shouted the helmsman. The American, Russian, and Chinese fleets raced towards the Sol system, maxing out their FTL abilities. The whole bridge crew of the American command ship, silent as a display of the battle map showed, accompanied by the battle chatter of Allied forces. Turner was agitated. Here, Earth was under attack by a massive alien fleet and the majority of humanity's space forces, the most powerful of their warships, not even in system to help. And they were still 30 minutes away. As any first-year cadet would tell you, a lot can happen in 30 minutes. Several bridge crew gasped as the battle chatter revealed Earth was being glassed by the Frontarian fleet. Mexico City, Beijing, and Cairo directly targeted. Dear God, a bridge officer said, realizing they were targeting the most densely populated areas of the continents. Turner was pissed. What right did they have to attack Earth in such a fashion? Hell, what right did they have to attack us at all? What did humanity ever do to deserve this? Her thoughts then turned to her husband, who she remembered was in Cairo on business. She was never the religious type, but in that moment, she prayed he was safe. If he was okay, she was going to hug him as tight as she ever had next time she saw him. If he was safe. One thing was for sure. If he, the love of her life, the sweetest man she knew, her high school sweetheart was killed, she would lay waste to the Frontarian homeworld, however long it would take, however many battles she would have to win. Whatever the cost be damned, she would make them pay. God, she hoped he was okay. All but one of the remaining Allied vessels were firing on the behemoths, the last less than a minute away from firing range. Most targeting the one over Mexico City. Come on, she said, waiting for them to be destroyed. Seconds later, another one blew up, one remaining, the one targeting Cairo. She looked at the battle map before her jaw dropped. There was only one Allied ship left, and damn near the whole Frontarian fleet closing on it. O'Malley contemplated their situation. Their hull plating was gone and munitions almost depleted. And even if they weren't, almost the entire Frontarian fleet was bearing down on them and would be in weapons range well before they could even fire off a shot at the behemoth. Orders? His first officer questioned. Orders? His first officer asked again, his voice mixed with a flare of concern. O'Malley looked around the bridge, all eyes on him, waiting for him to give a command. Helm? He said, almost not believing the order he was about to give. Set a collision course for the behemoth. Prepare to engage the FTL drive on my command, he said, ignoring the question. Aye, sir, the helmsman said before tapping on his console. Ready and standing by. Turner watched in horror as the Frontarian fleet bore down on the last remaining Allied ship, with the last behemoth still firing, which had destroyed most, if not all of Cairo by now. Her thoughts still on her husband. Admirals, a communication from command directed at her Russian and Chinese counterparts. The behemoths are destroyed, but our planetary defenses are gone. You have one and only one order. Save Earth. For the love of God, save Earth. The communication cut out suddenly. Quiet conversation filled the bridge of the American command ship. Turner was in the captain's ready room coordinating an attack plan with Admiral Drankov and Admiral Shu. No one knew exactly what to expect once they reached Sol, except that there would be hell to dish out. For most of them, Earth was their home. This was personal. The bridge suddenly went silent as Turner entered. ETA? She questioned. Good. Open a channel to the fleet, she commanded, waiting for the go-ahead from the comm officer. The Frontarian fleet patrolled the system, mainly concentrated around Earth. After the glassers were destroyed, they immediately began landing troops on the planet. Having faced heavy resistance from human ground troops, They began bombarding the human soldiers from orbit, allowing their troops to advance and secure more and more land. The battle to take Earth was going well, thanks in no small part to the heavy shelling the humans were receiving. As such, the Frentarian commanders had relaxed and dropped shields, blissfully unaware of the figurative hole they had dug themselves into. Suddenly, and without warning, hundreds of ships materialized and immediately began heavy bombardment of their fleet. The lucky ones were able to raise shields. The unlucky ones, well, they didn't have time to realize they were unlucky. "Half their fleet is destroyed," the tactical officer of the American command ship blissfully relayed. "The other half have raised shields." "Destroy them," Turner ordered, her face still stern. Turner cracked a smirk as the offender ship was quickly demolished by dozens of support vessels. She watched as the American and Chinese fleets carried out their orders flawlessly, making quick work of the Frentarians, who were clearly caught with their figurative pants down. The battle lasted less than 5 minutes. Retreating Frentarian vessels picked off by the Russian fleet, who was dispersed further out in the system, only a handful of damaged ships successfully escaping. All Allied ships reporting in. Some have taken minor damage. Nothing serious. Turner looked at Earth now displayed on the view screen, a perfect view of North America, with a hot, glowing mass where Mexico City should have been. "Admiral, I'm reading heavy battles all across North America, Africa, Europe, and Eastern Asia. Based on the battle chatter, they don't seem to be going well." "Then let's give them a hand, shall we?" Lieutenant Franco stood in silence as his squad waited for the green light, all armed with standard-issue personal rail rifles, or PRRs for short. Each one shot micrometer projectiles, meaning each soldier could carry 10,000 rounds. The Space Force had done their job, now it was their turn. They would be amongst the first wave of Marines to attack the enemy, giving much-needed aid to the Army. Their drop point was a few kilometers within New York City, which the Army had been desperately trying to retake. Diving right behind enemy lines meant they would be instantly tossed into the thick of it. Their mission: flank the enemy, allowing for the much larger Army troops to advance into the city. The red light suddenly went green. "Go! Go! Go!" Franco shouted, watching his squad mates dive out of the transport before he followed suit. Just like training, he thought as the wind wiped his face. His squad stayed in tight formation as they raced towards New York, the city coming into plain view as they cleared the cloud layer. Oh my God, he thought. He had a general idea of what a war zone looked like, what soldier who went through training wouldn't. But this was different. Knowing what something should look like and actually seeing it with your own eyes was two very different experiences. New York was on fire. The once beautiful city in shambles. Buildings were destroyed or damaged. Rubble coated the ground. He was still too far away to see, but he had no doubt civilian bodies littered the streets. He read his display: 900 feet, 800, 700. They were between buildings now, the moment of truth approaching. 600, 500, 400. He and his squad mates' chutes deploying automatically once they hit that magic number. The squad glided down, each landing within 100 feet of the drop point. Franco stood up. "All right, men on me," he said, hearing the sound of PRRs and some sort of energy weapons discharging close by. Suddenly the men were bombarded with beams of red energy, each man diving for the nearest cover. "Shit!" Franco yelled, his armor scuffed. He peeked from behind his cover before quickly pulling back. "Second floor," he said. "Tanco, Remeriez, Argo, lay down cover fire. Everyone else on me." The three opened fired on the second floor before Franco dead sprinted for the entrance, followed by his squad mates. He burst through the door, coming face to face with a 4-foot gray being. 2 large black soulless eyes, a large oval-shaped head, 2 short stumpy legs, and 2 long skinny arms. The alien wore some sort of uniform with strange symbols. He lifted his gun to fire before the alien deflected the gun and punched Franco straight in the face. He barely felt it. It was weak. He lurched forward, grabbing the alien by the throat and lifted it up. It was light, too. He looked it straight in the eye before unloading a few rounds into its body and tossing it aside. The room was filled with the beings, each scrambling to pick up a weapon. Franco and the others opened fire as they ran for cover, taking out most of them along the way. By the time they reached cover, only a few Frontarians remained standing, which were quickly picked off. They made their way to a stairwell and climbed to the second floor. This was easy. Were they being led into a trap? Or were these Frontarians just shitty soldiers? Either way, they pushed forward. They came upon the second floor, hearing energy weapon discharge. They were close. They burst into the floor and saw the entrance to a pretty large room. Franco walked in and saw the aliens, backs turned and firing out the window. He lifted his weapon and finished them off. Just shitty soldiers, he thought to himself. Hours passed and every encounter with the Frontarians went similarly. They found a transport sending Frontarians to the front, attacking them and taking them out with relative ease. They came upon some Frontarians pinning down another group of Marines. They breached the building they were in and took them out. A few minutes later were attacked as they made their way to the front lines, catching them off guard. One Marine was killed in the initial fire, but the rest managed to flank them and take out the group. Franco realized just how much the Frontarians relied on their orbital bombardment. Without it, they were crumbling. Eventually, they found what looked like some sort of makeshift command center inside a building. Loads of weird-looking equipment and computers. Hundreds of Frontarians speaking into headsets, relaying commands. Franco gave the order to go in. The Marines tossed several flashbangs and concussion grenades into the building before rushing in, firing on every gray being in sight. They cleared out the room before several Frontarian soldiers rushed in, firing on them. Once again, they took cover throughout the room, returning fire on the Frontarians, who at this point seemed panicked. Franco tossed a grenade at them, blowing up, clearing them out. It didn't take very long to clear out the Frontarians from the building, who seemed caught off guard at the Marines' intrusion. Before long, the squad met up with the army, who had managed to break the Frontarians' front line. They joined with them and pushed forward, clearing out buildings and picking off retreating Frontarians. By the end of the day, the Frontarians, now trapped between the advancing humans and the ocean, surrendered. This victory in NYC was no fluke. Without orbital bombardment, Frontarian lines all around the world crumbled. It took less than 24 hours before the whole world had been liberated, most Frontarian soldiers dead, some captured. Turner stood at the edge of what used to be Cairo, now just a massive ring of cooled magma. Her husband's hotel had been several kilometers within the destruction. She picked up her phone and called his number. "Boo-doo beep, boo-doo beep. The number you dialed is unavailable." The computerized voice relayed to her for what had to be the 10th time. It was possible he was safe, but he always had his phone with him. No, she knew what this meant. She collapsed to the ground, sobbing. 25 years of marriage, and this is how it ended. She remembered the promise she made to herself en route to the system. They had murdered her husband alongside millions of others. Her life plans in shambles, her future with him forcefully pulled out from under her. Her life had one singular purpose now, the seeds of vengeance taking root deep in her mind. No matter the cost, no matter how long it would take, she would lay waste to their home planet. She would make them feel the pain they had caused her. The days following the attack were chaotic yet productive. The UN passed a unanimous resolution establishing a mutual defense pact between every human nation and colony. Every nation ratified the treaty and subsequently declared war on the Frontarian Empire. The Frontarians had managed to do in a day what had eluded mankind for the entirety of its history: unite humanity in common cause. The captured Frontarian soldiers were interrogated. One of the first things we learned was the reason for their attack. Apparently, they saw us as a grave threat. Most intelligent life in the galaxy evolved from prey species. Predator-based intelligent life was rare, but had a tendency to be extremely hostile where it did occur and would go on grand crusades, usually taking a massive coalition to bring down. With how rapidly we were advancing, they believed it to be prudent to subjugate us before we became unstoppable. We also learned a bit about their tactics, biology, and governmental structure. But the one thing we couldn't figure out was anything about their empire in regard to what systems they controlled, and more importantly, the location of their homeworld. We had hit a dead end in that respect. The shipyards and mining facilities in system were relatively untouched by the Frontarians. Many believed this was because they had believed victory was imminent and decided to utilize them for themselves. A fatal mistake on the Frontarians' part. As war production went into overdrive, the mining facilities and shipyards working at 100% capacity. The wreckage from destroyed Frontarian vessels was salvaged, any intact technology reverse engineered. The deflector shields were cracked in a matter of weeks. Turns out humanity had already developed the underlining tech. It was just a matter of assembling the pieces and installing it on all Allied ships. The weapons took longer, months to crack, but eventually the Alliance learned their secrets too. In the months following the initial invasion, the Frontarians launched many attacks to retake the system, but this time we were ready. A defense perimeter was established and rigidly defended. Many battles were fought, lives lost, and heroes created, but ultimately, they couldn't break the perimeter. At one point, it was believed they had, as they launched an attack at one side of the system, while we lost contact with the perimeter on the other side. Contact was re-established 30 minutes later after a group of 4 ships managed to successfully repel an incursion of 15 Frontarian vessels. They couldn't regain a foothold in the system but had established a blockade and were able to successfully repel any attempts to leave. We were prisoners of our own system. Every time we had built up a sufficiently large fleet to try and break it, they would attack. We always managed to repel them, but at great cost, forcing us to start over. We were stuck in an endless cycle and couldn't seem to break out of it. After about a year of this, Command was desperate for any sort of tactical advantage we could use to break that damn blockade and make progress in this war. What they really needed was more information the prisoners either didn't have or refused to give. Agent Baker reread his mission profile, going over every bit of information. Being the best in the business, he had quickly made a name for himself in the CIA, and now here he was about to face a new enemy to infiltrate. Grand Admiral Turner had hand-picked him for this mission. Command was desperate for intel. She told him to come back with something concrete they could use, and that's exactly what he intended to do. He shook his head. He'd done some very dangerous things in his time in the agency, but this had to take the cake. They patiently waited for the go-ahead before a target ship was finally selected, and they were given the green light. Suddenly, inertia pushed everyone back against their restraints as the hull penetration unit suddenly accelerated. He saw the distance indicator rapidly approaching 0, before a loud and sudden deceleration rocked everyone around. After a moment, the front opened up to reveal an alien corridor, and the Marines dropped in. He looked at his indicator, 500 FT forward, then a left. Command had a pretty good idea of the layout of the ship based off wreckage they had salvaged from previous attacks. Still, though it could be wrong, he would have to be vigilant. They came upon a door, then entered before closing it shut. A single Frontarian was working with its back turned, but the sound of the door shutting caused it to turn around. Baker quickly raised his silenced gun and pulled the trigger. Couldn't have this mission fail due to one loud-mouthed alien. He nodded at a Marine who pulled out a handheld device and pushed a few buttons before boom. The ship shook. There went their ride, no turning back now. They walked to the other side of the room. A few Marines hid the Frontarian body before joining the rest. His indicator suggested there was a corridor beyond the door, and right across from them was another room with a computer terminal. He hoped his intelligence was correct, or else this mission could go very south very fast. He opened the door and came face to face with a Frontarian. He quickly jabbed its throat. The Frontarian choked, backing up in horror at the unexpected humans. Baker stepped forward quickly and snapped its neck before it could regain its voice and make a scene. He motioned for the Marines to clean it up before looking at the door in front of him. Based on the layout of the room, intelligence believed there should be 3 to 5 Frontarians in there at any given time. He took out a small device and began scanning the room. 7 heat signatures detected, the scanner indicated in flashing letters. He turned to the Marines before whispering, "Batons." They each pulled out a thin metal club with a handle, each electrified at the touch of a button. They nodded at him, indicating they were ready. This would be tricky. They would have to move quickly and subdue the aliens before they had a chance to set off an alert. They would also have to do it relatively quietly lest they gave themselves away. He took a deep breath before shoving the door open. He made his way to a computer terminal, taking out a special device made specifically for this mission. It was small and rectangular, and was designed to plug into the Frontarians' computers. He pushed it in before the computer interface went fuzzy for a second, before a progress bar popped up, showing how much of the database had been downloaded. This would take some time, so he decided to browse the database for anything of note. Next, he then looked at their military strategies and doctrine. Their initial strategy, especially against humans, was to dominate with overwhelming force. When that failed, and they couldn't retake the system, they had set a policy of containment until a new strategy could be devised. Well, that explains the blockade, he thought. He then looked at population distribution of the empire. The Frontarian homeworld had 7.5 billion inhabitants. The rest of the Frontarians scattered throughout their colonies, research stations, and military bases. All Brovarians contained a homeworld. With that, he then turned to information about the Brovarians. He read down their information page, finding out they're from a system 10 light years from Earth, the closest of the Frontarian systems, conquered 10 years ago to act as a staging ground for invasion of the Sol system. He read on. Apparently they had some sort of minor rebellion going on, threat assessment 211, whatever that meant. Interesting. He made a mental note of the potential ally. But what did they know about us? He searched for all information about humanity, and a very detailed page popped up. They had information dating back hundreds of years. The first entry, taking place around the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The original entry placed us at threat level 311, violent predator species on verge of self-destruction. The next entry was over 150 years later, FTL signatures detected in Sol system. He read on. Scout ships sent to investigate reported humanity had not destroyed themselves but had kept advancing, now possessing FTL drives. Self-destruction unlikely. Threat assessment 911. This is when things really started getting detailed. They had reports detailing information on just about everything. Governments, major languages, culture, military might, and even potential strategies on how to subdue us. He noted the current threat assessment level very recently updated within the past year. 1111 followed by chilling words, exterminate species. Oof, he thought. He kept reading, Earth, 12 billion inhabitants. Followed by a list of human colonies, research stations, mining facilities, and military bases in descending order of population. He quickly read down the list of colonies. Mars Colony, Lunar Alpha, Europa. He was about to scroll to the military bases when he stopped. Wait a minute, he said that out loud this time. Found something? One of the Marines questioned. Maybe, he said, rereading the list of colonies. Mars Colony, Lunar Alpha, Europa. Huh. They hadn't listed Alpha Centauri, the second largest colony and rapidly growing before the war. In fact, he couldn't find any mention of Alpha Centauri anywhere. He then pulled up a star chart, pulling information on the system closest to Sol. It was not very detailed. The one and only entry was from 50 years prior. Triple star system, rich in resources. One M-class planet, uninhabited. Uninhabited. He reread the sentence a few times before he pulled back up the list of human colonies. Mars Colony, Lunar Alpha, Europa. He looked at the Marine and smiled. Just what we need. We've been detected. Baker looked at the progress bar, 95% uploaded. Good enough, he thought before pulling the device out of the terminal and pocketing it. He pulled up a map to the hangar bay before they left the room, immediately coming face to face with a group of armed Frontarians. Baker and the Marines immediately dove for cover as the two groups opened fire on each other. Within seconds, the group of Frontarians were dead, bleeding out. Baker turned to face the Marines. One was dead, 2 others injured, unable to stand. Shit. He looked at the squad leader. It won't be much time before they send more. We need to go. He hated what he was about to do, But this mission was too important. By order of Admiral Turner, no man left behind doctrine did not apply to this mission. Each Marine knew this when they volunteered. "Understood," the squad leader said before turning to the two injured Marines. "Good luck, men. I'll see to it command recognizes your sacrifice." The two injured Marines nodded before the rest took off. Baker followed his datapad's directions to the hangar bay, the group in a dead sprint. 500 meters ahead. Suddenly the group came under fire from behind. The Marines returned fire as they continued to run, but before they could reach their destination, they were fired upon from the front. They dove for what little cover they could find. "Concussions!" the squad leader yelled before he and another Marine threw one grenade forward and backwards. After detonation, the group resumed sprinting forward, shooting the dazed Frentarians as they passed. Within seconds, they were at their destination. Baker quickly opened the door before the group rushed in, and he quickly shut and locked it. He turned around before seeing a room full of containers, and no crafts to be seen. He looked around for a few moments before letting out a string of swears. "This isn't a shuttle bay, it's a cargo bay," he yelled angrily. The one thing intelligence was wrong about just had to be this. Bang! Baker jumped as the Frentarians attempted to open the door. He quickly looked around for something, anything they could use for escape. Nothing. They were trapped. "We're going to have to fight our way out." Bang! The door started coming loose. One of the Marines quickly set up a claymore as the rest took up defensive positions around the room. The Marine quickly ran back to join them. Bang! The door came crashing down before the enemy started rushing the room. Boom! The sound of the claymore going off echoed around the room. Baker was at awe at the sheer amount of gore he bore witness to. Frentarian bodies mangled as they were blown back. "Toss me a concussion," Baker yelled. "Last one," the squad leader yelled back as he tossed him the grenade. Baker looked on, seeing what had to dozens of Frentarians pouring into the room. He pulled the pin and threw the grenade, angling it to bounce into the corridor before going off. Baker stood up, coming face to face with a Frentarian. It raised its weapon, but Baker quickly deflected it, grabbing its arm with one hand while unsheathing his knife with the other. With one quick motion, he pulled it forward while jabbing his knife repeatedly before tossing the body aside. He grabbed his gun off the floor before looking to find the Marines had finished off the remaining Frentarians in the room. "Move!" he yelled before running towards the entrance, the remaining squad close behind. They re-entered the corridor to find a few dozen Frentarians regaining their bearings. Baker and the squad quickly open-fired before they had a chance to react, quickly taking off down the corridor again after finishing them off. They ran for what had to be a solid minute before ducking into another room. Baker quickly looked around, empty. Thank God, he thought before closing the door. They all took a minute to catch their breath as the squad leader did a head count. Suddenly, they could hear what sounded like a group of boots running past in the corridor before the hall went silent. At least the Frentarians lost them. They were safe. For now, anyway, but it wouldn't be long before they were discovered. "Well, make it fast. I doubt we have much time." That much Baker knew. Okay, he thought. He didn't have his data pad, but at least he had... He quickly checked his pocket to make sure he still had the device with the alien database. He felt around for a bit before he found it still sitting in there. Thank God. Okay, he thought. What can we do? He still had the database, but no datapad. He couldn't remember the locations of the escape pods, and the location of the shuttle bay was just wrong. What did he remember? He thought back to when he studied the schematics intelligence had provided him with. His face lit up, cracking a smile. There was one very important place he did remember the location of that he was certain intelligence was right about. He stood up looking at the squad leader. Baker led the group of Marines through a series of corridors, ducking into rooms every time they heard someone approaching, occasionally having to dispose of the unlucky Frentarians who happened to be in the rooms they hid in. Due to them having to sneak around avoiding detection, it took nearly a half an hour to reach their destination. Assuming the schematics intelligence provided are correct, the bridge should be right through this door, Baker said, staring at the entrance in front of him. He tried opening it after the Marines motioned they were ready. Locked. It's locked. We're going to have to force it open. Baker wasn't surprised. After all, if he was commanding a ship and a group of hostile aliens were loose, he'd probably do the same. The Marines set up explosives around the door before everyone stepped back behind cover. The squad leader pulled out the detonator before motioning to his squad to be ready. He flipped the switch. The surprised Frentarians barely had time to react before the Marines open-fired, mowing down the helpless bridge crew. One bridge officer managed to shoot a Marine before being mowed down with PRR fire. The bridge went silent. "Secure the entrance!" the squad leader yelled as two Marines posted themselves by the door. The medic examined the fallen Marine. "He'll live if we can get him to a medical facility soon, but we don't have much time," he said as he began treating his wound. Baker immediately went to work, trying to figure out which station was the helm. "This is much harder without my data pad," he thought as he began toying with buttons on various consoles. Suddenly lights flashed as an alarm started blaring. "Oops," Baker said as he released the button he had just pushed. Obviously, this was the tactical station. He made his way to what looked like what may be a helm. He had trained on a Frentarian escape pod before this mission, but flying an escape pod was much different than a starship. He began toying with controls before the Marines guarding the door began shouting. "If this is anything like the escape pod," he thought to himself before pushing two small buttons forward. The ship lurched forward. "Aha!" he shouted before pushing them all the way. The map indicated they were moving deeper within the system, quickly approaching the defense perimeter. A new alarm started blaring before a hologram of two human ships displayed. "Alliance ships, thank God," he said before the ship suddenly rocked as a new alarm started blaring. "Shit! They're firing on us!" Well, he couldn't really blame them, for they knew this was another attack run. "Where's the goddamn comm?" The ship shook once more as it took another volley. He searched frantically for the comm station before being knocked to his feet as the ship rocked hard. He looked at the tactical station, which displayed a hologram, indicated something about the shields. Shit. The ship rocked hard again before he got back on his feet. The group made their way towards one of the entrances, half the Marines injured, having to be carried by the rest. As soon as they were all in, Baker shut the door. This he had trained in. He knew what to do. He pushed a big green button in the center console before the escape pod ejected. It didn't take long before an Alliance ship picked them up, tractoring them into their shuttle bay. The door opened to a group of soldiers, weapons drawn. "Boy, is it good to see you guys," Baker exclaimed before the soldiers lowered their weapons. Turner browsed through the alien database, Baker's mission report sitting on her desk. This is what they needed. Finally, they could make progress in this war. She smiled as a plan took shape in her mind. Turner walked out of the conference room, along with several other admirals, generals, and world leaders. They had been in there for a solid 20 hours going over the alien database and hammering out a plan she had presented to end the war. They finally had approved it. The first thing they needed to do was find a way past the blockade, which they believed they had one. In the weeks since the database was retrieved, Command had time to study it, specifically the specs of the alien scanners. Knowing how they worked, Command believed they had developed a type of cloaking device specifically tailored to Frentarian sensors. The ships were still optically seeable and were still detectable by human sensors, but in theory would be completely invisible to the Frentarians. It was Turner's job test, that theory. She ordered an Alliance ship to be outfitted with the experimental device before she went to bed. By the time she woke up, it was installed and ready to go. She ordered the ship's cargo bay filled with equipment to start building a shipyard. Their orders were to deliver the equipment to Alpha Centauri and then return to base. Approximately 10 hours later, they returned, completely unnoticed by the Frentarians. Success. Having established that the cloaking device did indeed work, they were able to move on to Phase 2. Thousands of tons of equipment, supplies, and personnel were sent to Alpha Centauri. It was humanity's second biggest colony, but only had a single orbital station and no shipyards or mining facilities. They would have to start completely from scratch, building the shipyards and mining facilities before even beginning construction of the fleet. Given how Command needed a 1,000-ship Centaurian fleet, this would take a while. a year at best, but probably longer. Once she had established a continual flow of supplies, equipment, and people to the colony, she then moved on to the second part of Phase 2. She had Agent Baker, as well as several thousand other agents, sent to the Brovarian homeworld to train their resistance in the art of guerrilla warfare. 211 threat assessment level was just unacceptably low. She needed that to rise by a few points. If they could stretch the Frentarians' resources, the plan stood a better chance of success. Once she had that all set up, she just needed to sit back and wait for Phase 3 to be ready. This would take a long time, so she just helped with day-to-day operations of Phase 2, occasionally having to lead a defense against a Frentarian raid on the system. Months went by, and the plan was starting to come along nicely. The shipyards were finally completed at Alpha Centauri, and ships were starting to get mass-produced. Agents on the Brovarian world reported contact with resistance leaders, and interceptions of Frentarian communications informed them the Brovarian resistance had been bumped up, not 1, but 2 points, which placed them at a threat assessment level of 411. The plan was coming along completely unhitched. Turner sat at her desk at Allied High Command. She smiled as she read the reports of the Centaurian fleet development. It had been 6 months since the shipyards had been completed, and construction of the fleet began. They were actually ahead of schedule, and if intelligence was correct, the Frentarians were none the wiser. She could see herself making good on the promise she made to herself over a year and a half ago. She was going to make those Frentarians pay for murdering her husband alongside millions of others. All she had to do was bide her time. She kicked back as she read more reports. Several incursions into the system had taken place the past week, all opposing ships destroyed. No Allied ships destroyed, only minor damage. She flipped to the next one. Several Frentarian soldiers had attempted escape from their POW camp, all captured during attempt, yada yada yada. She flipped to the next one before she thought she saw movement in the corner of her eye. She looked up visually, searching the room. All she saw was a silent, empty office. Mine must be playing tricks on me, she thought as she sipped on her 4th cup of coffee before she began reading the next report. She got through the first sentence before a sudden feeling of impending doom hit her like a wall of bricks. She looked up again, scanning the room. Nothing. She went back to reading the report, still unable to shake the sudden dread that hit her moments before. She read a few more sentences before looking up again. Something was very wrong here. She could feel it. Yet all she saw was an empty office, the only noise being the chatter and footsteps of passing officers in the hallway. She read a few more sentences before stopping and cracking open a drawer in her desk. A single holstered rail pistol, along with several files and miscellaneous office equipment. Seeing that pistol made her feel a little better, but that dread hung thick in the air. She was in serious danger. She could feel it. Suddenly and almost completely instinctually, she dove to the ground before chunks of wall flew out from behind her, the sound of Frentarian weapons fire ringing throughout the room. She grabbed the pistol before looking around the office. There was nothing for a moment before she caught a glimpse of what looked like a Frentarian outline. She instinctively ducked before a beam-up energy flew at her, missing her head by a few centimeters. She quickly aimed and fired at the location of the outline. Nothing. She kept her pistol raised, intensely scanning the room. Okay, she thought to herself, as she pushed the panic button under her desk. Just follow your instincts. They did just save your life. It was silent for a moment, before the sounds of rushing footsteps could be heard approaching. Suddenly she saw the glimmer of an outline. She opened fire on it as another beam of energy raced at her, striking her shoulder. Suddenly several guards burst through the door, the first taking a hit from the Frentarian weapon before the next tackled the glimmer. A Frentarian becoming fully visible the second it hit the floor. It tried to struggle but was bleeding out, and obviously weaker than the guard pinning it down. "Are you okay?" one of the guards asked. Several hours later, the doctor gave Turner the all-clear. Command had been on lockdown, going into high alert the moment Turner pushed her panic button. She had been informed that 2 other Frentarians had been apprehended, one caught trying to steal classified documents, and the other captured shortly after killing Admiral Shu. All had been injured but were stabilized. She ordered they be prepared for questioning. While the Frontarians recovered from their injuries, Command immediately went to work trying to reverse engineer their personal cloaking devices. It only took a few days to find out that while they rendered the wearer optically invisible, they still emitted infrared light. With that, all Allied military bases, ships, and camps were outfitted with infrared sensors that tripped an alarm anytime an anomalous infrared signature was detected. Meanwhile, the captured Frontarians were brought to interrogation chambers. "Your little cloaking device is impressive." Turner stared down the Frontarian who was chained to the table. "But we just have to know, how did you get on Earth?" The Frontarian stared blankly at her, its deep, soulless eyes saying nothing. You can just tell me what I want to know now, or we can pry the information out of you. But I assure you, Frontarian, we've had plenty of time to learn how to effectively interrogate your kind since your initial attack." She stared it down as it grimaced. "Either way, we'll find out what we want to know." She stared deep into its eyes before it spoke up. "You think you can win this war, human, but I assure you any victory you possess is merely a setback. One day my people will kill the last human, and on that day I will think of you." "Fine," she said, wiping its spit off. "Have it your way." With that, she exited the interrogation chamber, stopping in front of an interrogation specialist. "Break it," she said before the man entered with a set of terrifying-looking tools. The interrogator clicked a button on the small device in his hand before the Frontarian relaxed. Prior to interrogation, about 1 million nanites specifically designed for Frontarian physiology had been injected into the alien's bloodstream, each making their way to the pain centers of its brain. Once in place, the interrogator could simulate all sorts of pain with varying intensities, without any actual physical harm coming to the prisoner. Under normal circumstances, the interrogator would have objected to such methods, but his entire family had been killed in Mexico City. As far as he was concerned, this Frontarian, all Frontarians deserved such treatment. He would get the answers Command wanted, no matter what it took. There was a pause before the interrogator lifted the device up and the Frontarian spoke. 1,500. "No, you told me the location of your unit's base. Where are the rest?" The interrogator lifted the device again before the Frontarian spoke frantically. "Please, I'm telling the truth. I wasn't told where the other bases were, just my own." The interrogator believed him after all. Why would it know the locations of every base? That was a major security risk. "All right," he said before moving on. "Your government wouldn't send 2,500 agents just to commit a few assassinations and steal classified documents. What are they planning?" The Frontarian was silent. Having revealed his specific mission when caught, number of agents on world, method of undetectable travel, and location of his unit was one thing, but to blow the lid on their entire operation. The interrogator got closer. I said, "What are they planning?" "Go to hell," the Frontarian said back, or whatever their language's equivalent was. At least that's what the interrogator's translation device interpreted it as. The interrogator sighed before changing the setting on the device. "Have you ever been on fire, Frontarian?" The alien was silent. "Neither have I, but from what I've heard, it's quite the unpleasant experience. Would you like to test that theory?" The interrogator thought he saw the alien gulp. "I've set this to level 7. Keep in mind that last setting was level 4. So I'll ask you again, what is your government planning?" "Reba, Octuvi, Gentiv Quava." The interrogator checked his translation device. Something about his maternal ancestor, an exact match, was not found. "Very well," he said before pushing the on button. Admiral Turner winced as the doctor changed her bandage. It had been 3 days since the attempt on her life, and her shoulder wound still stung like a bitch. Her mobile buzzed. She quickly checked it as she had been receiving updates on the 3 Frontarians' interrogation. Frontarian 1 confirms 1,500 agents on Earth. That confirmed it. All 3 giving the same lie was unlikely. She thought it fitting that her would-be assassin would be the last to crack in every question. Still, though, none had revealed what their government was planning, not yet anyway. Drankov had already boarded his command ship and was ordering the in-system fleet in position. The plan. Admiral Drankov would command the in-system fleet, while Admiral Lee would command 500 Centauri fleet vessels. They would simultaneously attack the blockade flanking them. Hopefully the Frontarians hadn't caught wind of Phase 3, or else that could go south very easily. Assuming they hadn't, they would break the blockade, then push on into the Brovarian system, where they'd fight to liberate the world. Her screen lit up as Admiral Lee was transmitting a message fleet-wide. Today will go down in history as the turning point of the war. Today we fight to liberate not just our world, but another as well. We all have the pleasure. She muted the transmission. She thought about Admiral Shu. He was a great leader but was dead, murdered by a Frontarian. Admiral Lee, on the other hand, had never commanded such a large fleet in combat and would now be leading one into what was perhaps humanity's most important battle in all its history. At least his fleet would operate with the specially made cloaking devices. That was one advantage the seasoned Admiral Drankov didn't have, at least not until they broke the blockade. "Admiral Turner to the bridge," the comm rang out. She quickly exited her ready room. "Report." "Admiral Lee has ordered his fleet into FTL jump," said Captain Farnsworth. "Admiral, we've received word from Lee's fleet. They're in position." "Good," Admiral Drankov responded. "Then let's begin." The in-system fleet moved in to engage the blockade. Hundreds of Alliance ships opened fire on the Frontarians as the enemy held position, returning fire. The battle chatter playing as hundreds of ship captains' voices could be heard relaying orders as their ships took fire. "Sir, the Missouri's been disabled," the tactical officer shouted. Drankov watched the battle map as several Frontarian ships blipped out of existence, but still the blockade held position. "Sir, our fleet is taking damage. Should I signal Lee to move in?" The ship rocked as it took enemy fire. "The Sol and California have been destroyed. Several others disabled. All fleet ships are taking fire," the tactical officer shouted. The command ship rocked again as it took several more volleys. "Not yet," Drankov shouted. "Come on," he thought. "Why aren't they moving?" The ship shook hard as it took several more hits. "Tell the fleet to fall back and regroup, then focus an attack here." Drankov pointed to a spot on the battle map displaying a point in the blockade that had been weakened. "Relaying now," the tactical officer said as he pushed buttons on his console. Drankov watched the battle map as his fleet fell back before swooping around and concentrated fire on a few select unlucky Frontarian vessels. It didn't take long before they were destroyed. "Sir, there's a gap in the blockade." The captain had barely finished his sentence before the battle map showed the blockade breaking position and moving in to surround the Allied fleet. Turner watched the battle map of Sol. Drankov's fleet was taking quite a beating, but Lee's fleet was holding position. Turner smiled. She knew his game. He was waiting for the blockade to break position and surround him so that Lee's fleet could flank them, trapping them in a storm of hellfire. Suddenly, Drankov's fleet fell back before pressing the attack on a single point, followed soon after by the blockade breaking to surround him. "Just wait," she said with a wide grin. Drankov was knocked off his feet as his ship shook hard. "Keep firing," he yelled back as their ship and the rest of his fleet took heavy punishment. The ship rocked hard again as he made his way back on his feet, nearly knocking him over again. "Come on," he yelled, before Frontarian ships started quickly disappearing off the battle map, half of them turning around and firing on Lee's fleet. Not one of Lee's ships was hit as the Frontarians fired wildly. "Sir, they can't seem to get a lock on his ships. They're firing blind." Drankov and Lee's fleets continued to pound the Frontarian fleet, their numbers diminishing quickly. His ship shook again as it took several more hits. "Pay no heed to them," he shouted. "They're just angry they can't hit the cloaked ships." It didn't take long until a few dozen Frontarian vessels remained, making a concentrated run for Lee's fleet in a desperate attempt to escape. Most gunned down by Allied ships and returning fire at point-blank range, managing to hit a few. Only a few made it through and promptly went to FTL. Turner smiled as the battle map showed the Frontarian fleet obliterated, only a few escaping. The bridge crew cheered. The blockade intended to trap humanity had been lifted. They were free. "All ships reporting battle ready and are in position." Turner smiled. She could feel her vengeance at hand. Then have all ships set a course for Fronteria Prime. The captain relayed the orders. A few seconds passed before he turned back to her. All ships have set a course and are awaiting your command. The fleet engaged their FTL drives, zipping out of the system. It would take a few hours before arrival. In the meantime, she pulled up the other Allied fleet's battle map. They would reach the Brovarian homeworld hours before her fleet reached their destination. All she could do was watch and wait. Drankov and Lee's fleets had been traveling for hours and were close to their destination. 5 minutes until we reach Brovaline, the comm officer said. 4,000 enemy ships, sir. Good Lord, he thought. They were outnumbered, 5-1. He spoke up. Has the in-system fleet activated their cloaking devices yet? They had left them off in the initial attack to draw the enemy away from their positions, but there was no reason to keep them disengaged now. Yes, sir, the tactical officer responded, but the enemy may have adapted their sensors. We just don't know. Well, let's hope they didn't, he paused. Only one way to know for sure. The fleet raced for a few more minutes before entering the system and dropping out of FTL, coming face to face with the massive enemy armada. First Contact, the final. Although this is the last of the First Contact series, I will be starting a few more series taking place a few years after the events of Distress Call, about a century after First Contact, one of which will be heavily related to a certain previous story of mine. Until then, here's Part 9, Fruits of Vengeance. As always, constructive criticism is welcome. Enjoy. Edit. If you're here from the BTH Part 5 reference, skip to the last segment of story before the epilogue. Drankov stared down the enemy fleet. They had not changed position, either not detecting them or waiting for the Alliance to make the first move. The ball was in his court. The Allied fleet has exited FTL, all 803 ships reporting in, awaiting your command. The captain of his command ship said. Drankov stopped to think. Never in his life had he thought he would be here, leading an invasion of an alien world, albeit a liberation, but an invasion nonetheless. His whole life, humanity had been striving towards total peace. Make no mistake, they had still been divided. Governments still built militaries and fleets. There had still been rogue states and terrorists. But humanity was finally coming together. A real human versus human war had not been fought since before his life, and they had hoped to carry that trend for peace into the galaxy. But the grim reality of the galactic arena slapped at their hopes for peaceful cooperation. A savage attack on Earth had revived the old ways humanity was just starting to completely do away with. Hell, he had originally joined the military for the chance at a stable job with upward mobility. Not once before the attack did he think he would have to fight a war or command a fleet against an actual foe. Yet here he was, in the midst of war, his fleet waiting on his command to strike. The Frontarians had dragged humanity back to savagery, and it was his job to make them pay the price of their foolishness. Orders, the captain said again. Drankov pointed to the battle map. We're going to split the fleet in 3. The first third I will command and will engage the entire Frontarian armada, he said, moving his finger across the entire enemy battle line. The second will be commanded by Lee and will move around to the side and over to flank them. And the third will hang back and reinforce the first 2 as needed. The captain relayed the orders to the fleet, which quickly divided themselves into the 3 groups. Then let's do this. The first fleet spread themselves out and gunned it towards the enemy line. The second stayed much more compact as it maneuvered around the edge of the system, flanking the enemy armada. The Frontarian fleet held position. The first fleet held their fire until they were within 1 AU of the armada, at which point Drankov gave the order to open fire. Suddenly, the silence that had filled the bridge was replaced by the frenzy of battle chatter. The enemy is returning fire, all misses. It appeared as though the Frontarians were still vulnerable to the Allied cloaking devices. Drankov breathed a sigh of relief. This advantage was still theirs to use, but he wondered how long until they figured a way around them. He watched the battle map. Frontarian vessels were disappearing off it at a rapid rate, but there were so many. Even with this advantage, it would take a long time. The command ship shook. The direct hit to our shields! the tactical officer yelled. Move us to a different position, Drankov yelled before the helmsman typed frantically on his console. Have the fleet hold position until fired upon, then change positions as needed, he said, looking at the battle map. Frentarian ships were being destroyed at an impressive rate. They had almost destroyed 1,000 ships, meaning now they were only outnumbered 4-1. Start firing nuclear warheads into the heart of their fleet, Drankov ordered. It didn't take long until they detected the massive explosions. The Frentarian vessels moving to avoid the blasts, many caught up in them. The first few explosions didn't change much as their shields could withstand a few nuclear blasts. But after a few minutes, the Frentarian ships in the center of their fleet had started to diminish. Drankov was about to give another order when the battle map showed the enemy fleet suddenly lurch forward, racing towards their position. All ships evasive maneuvers, Drankov shouted. The bastards couldn't hit from that distance, so they were going to engage at point-blank range. Carrier groups deploy fighters now. Drankov barely finished his order when the whole ship shook, taking several volleys. The battle space went chaotic. Allied ships bobbed and weaved between enemy vessels, firing on anything that didn't carry an Allied insignia. Fighters went on strafing runs against larger enemy ships. Ship debris went flying. Fighters and ships desperately maneuvering to avoid collisions while taking hits point-blank range from the enemy. Sir, several Allied ships are disabled. The captain was interrupted as the whole bridge crew were knocked to their feet, the ships taking continuous hits from a few nearby enemy vessels. Take them out, Drankov shouted as he was knocked to his feet again. Turner watched the battle map. Drankov had inflicted serious damage to the enemy fleet. Almost 2/5 of the armada were destroyed, but his own fleet was starting to lose ships rapidly. At least he still had 1/3 of his fleet sending in reinforcements to the rest as needed. She couldn't help but admire his tactical prowess. Turner thought for a moment. The alien database had indicated that at least 500 vessels remained in the home system at all times. This was going to be easier than she thought. Either they were hidden, or it was more likely that the others had been sent to fight Drankov's fleet, in which case the plan was coming along perfectly. Still, she would have to be cautious. Open a channel to the fleet, she ordered before the comm officer gave her the go-ahead. This is Admiral Turner. We are less than 5 minutes from entering the Frentarian system. We are detecting about 200 enemy vessels. This is less than we were expecting, so keep your eyes peeled for any hidden fleets. Once we arrive, we have 3 main objectives we need to accomplish. Our first objective is to eliminate the enemy fleet, along with any planetary defense systems they may have. Once that has been accomplished, we will proceed with our second objective: destroy any and all in-system shipyards, mining facilities, military bases, and anything else that may be used in the war effort. Then we will move on to our third and final objective: orbital bombardment of their world. Our plan is to catch them by surprise. We will be sending you all an initial enemy vessel target. Come out of FTL as close to it as you can and fire. By the time they realize what's happening, it'll be too late. Godspeed, everyone. With that, she signaled to cut off the transmission. The next few minutes were filled with the hustle and bustle of coordinating targets with the rest of the fleet. The command ship, as well as several escorts, would land deep within the system, near a cluster of enemy vessels, who were separated from the rest of the enemy armada. Turner counted down until their arrival. It was less than a minute at this point. The Allied fleet dropped out of FTL, scattered across the system, opening fire on all their pre-selected targets, obliterating the Frentarian vessels in a series of spectacular explosions. Target destroyed, the tactical officer relayed before the ship shook hard, taking several volleys from the nearby enemy vessels not initially targeted. Is our cloaking device online? Turner said, worried that they immediately were able to target them. Yes, ma'am, the captain replied before the bridge crew were nearly knocked on their feet. Ma'am, the whole fleet is reporting the enemy is maintaining positive target locks. They seem to have figured a way around our cloaks, Captain Farnsworth yelled. Shit, Turner thought before speaking up. Have the fleet disengage their cloaks. The ship shook hard again, interrupting her. Have them reroute power to their deflectors. The ship rocked once more before the last Frontarian vessel they engaged was destroyed. The last of the Frontarian vessels are being engaged. All fleet vessels are reporting in. Some have received minor damage, but all are still battle-capable. The captain relayed to her, "Admiral, I'm picking up a distress call. It's coming from a station orbiting Frontaria Prime." The comm officer shouted, interrupting Turner's train of thought. "Have the closest units converge and destroy it," she ordered. She watched the battle map as several Alliance ships engaged the station, taking heavy damage. The command ship, as well as dozens of others, converged on the station, all opening fire as soon as they were in range. It didn't take long before the station was obliterated in a massive explosion. With that, the fleet began firing on shipyards and mining facilities. Fighters were launched from their carriers and made strafing runs against military bases and research facilities. Turner watched as one by one all off-world Frontarian facilities and encampments were eliminated. In less than an hour, just her fleet remained. Drankov was nearly knocked off his feet again as his ship shook hard. He was barely able to keep his balance as his command ship took heavy punishment. "Shields are down to 50%, the tactical officer yelled. "Sir, all fleet vessels are reporting the enemy is maintaining target lock. They've broken through the cloaks," the captain yelled. "Have our fleet fall back, and have the remaining portion of the Third Fleet meet us and engage the enemy," Drankov barked. The First and Third Fleets raced towards each other, the first still caught up in the midst of the enemy armada. "Evasive maneuvers!" the captain yelled before the debris made contact with the ship's deflectors, sending the whole bridge crew off their feet. Several alarms started blaring. "Shields down to 30%, the tactical officer yelled after getting back up. Drankov watched the battle map as the Third Fleet made contact with the enemy armada, exchanging fire as their carriers deployed their fighters. The First Fleet swooped around and flew right back into the heat of battle. "Sir, we've been cut off from the Second Fleet," the captain shouted as the command ship rocked again, taking heavy bombardment. Drankov looked at the battle map again. They had destroyed nearly half the enemy fleet, but the Allied fleets were taking on heavy casualties. Allied ships were disappearing off the map almost as fast as the Frontarian vessels. The two Allied fleets fought their way towards each other. Allied fighters made strafing runs, followed closely by the Allied ships who fired on the enemy ships, maneuvering to avoid collisions with the enemy ships and debris. The enemy fleet condensed, focusing fire on the lead vessels and wedging themselves between the two fleets, clearly trying to keep them separated. "Our shields are almost gone," the tactical officer yelled. The battle grew more condensed as the Allied ships continued to push, and the enemy ships continued to bombard them, trying to force them to stay separate. Suddenly, about half of the remaining Frontarians' fleet quickly moved off and went to FTL, blipping off the battle map. "What the hell?" Drankov was unable to finish his sentence before a sudden jolt sent him flying a few feet, landing hard on the floor. He sat up dazed, his ears ringing. As his hearing slowly returned to normal, he noticed many bridge crew also dazed, trying to make their way back to their stations. "Status?" he yelled, getting back up on his feet. "Our shield emitters blew out and we have several hull breaches. Emergency bulkheads are in place." "Sir, an enemy ship has locked onto us," the tactical officer shouted, cutting him off. Drankov watched the view screen as a Frontarian vessel closed on them. "Come and take us, you bastard," he thought, preparing himself for his inevitable death. "We thought you could use a hand." Admiral Lee's voice could be heard over the comm. The Second Fleet had broken through to them. "Are you all right?" "Beaten but ready as ever. Glad to hear you, Lee," Drankov replied, pausing before continuing. "Did you see that? Half their fleet just up and left." "They must have caught wind of Turner's fleet," Lee replied. With that, Drankov quickly coordinated with the remaining Allied vessels. The Allied fleet, finally united, was able to push back the enemy ships as the command ships withdrew further within friendly lines. Drankov quickly ordered half the remaining Allied ships to attack the enemy's open flank. The Allied fleet was taking casualties, but the Frontarian armada was being torn into, their numbers dropping exponentially. Before long, they outnumbered the enemy, almost completely surrounding them. Suddenly, the remaining Frontarian vessels made a concentrated run for their only escape path, their ships quickly FTLing out of the system as soon as they cleared the battle space. "Holy shit. Talk about a hasty departure," Drankov remarked before turning to the captain. "Status. 247 Allied ships are battle-capable. All took heavy damage. The rest are either destroyed or disabled." It took less than a day to secure the planet. Most remaining Frontarians were trapped between Bavarian resistance fighters and human marines, all the while being bombarded from orbit. Most chose to surrender rather than face certain death. The planet had been liberated. "Fire," Turner ordered, watching as the massive tungsten rods were dropped, racing their way down and slamming into the surface with much more power than any nuclear bomb humanity could have ever hoped to develop. The fleet were collectively dropping about 200 a minute, pounding into the Frontarian world, decimating anything and everything in their path. It only took 5 minutes before Captain Farnworth spoke up. "Objective 3 is complete. Tactical, prepare to The tactical console beeped. "Admiral, I'm detecting a massive fleet converging on the system." He paused. "They're not friendly." "Then signal the fleet. Time for us to get out of here." With that, the Allied fleet engaged their FTL drives and zipped out of the system, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake.
If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.